Thank you for joining us today for our webinar, Coming Home, How Couples Can Communicate and Grow After Treatment. My name is Stephen Mitchell, and I'm happy to be here with you today. I am a PhD LPC with a background in marriage and family therapy, and also had the privilege of supervising all the outpatient programs at the Center for Dependency, Addiction, and Rehabilitation at the University of Colorado Hospital in the last several years. And so it's a pleasure to be here with you today. And our webinar is sponsored by Foundations Recovery Network. So thank you, Foundations, for having us. And wanted to let you know that there's a Q&A time after the webinar is done, and you can submit a question on the bottom left of your screen at any point during the presentation. And all questions will be answered during the last 10 minutes of the program. And you can find a PDF of the presentation and additional resources under the headshot image located on the left of your screen. And then also, if you need any assistance, further assistance, you can email Melissa, and her email address is listed there on the screen. And also wanted to let you know that this is our NADAC credit information, and to receive credit, you must watch the program all the way through the Q&A section at the end of the presentation. Do not leave the console, and please continue to stay on the platform, and you will be automatically redirected to an evaluation landing page. And if this is your first time attending a webinar in 2019, you will need to create a NACCME account when you are first directed to the landing page. And for all subsequent webinars you attend, you will already have an account and will just need to log in. And after completion of the evaluation, you'll be able to download or print your certificate. And the NADAC credit is only offered for the live broadcast. So let's begin. So today we're talking about the process of coming home for a person that has entered into inpatient treatment and is in a partnered relationship. The process of coming home can often be difficult, and so we're going to explore how couples can connect, communicate, and grow after treatment. And our objectives are to identify common struggles for couples post-treatment, to describe effective communication strategies to increase couple connection post-treatment, and to describe strategies for long-term couple growth and connection. Now, coming home from treatment is a mix of relief and anxiety and hope and fear. As treatment providers, we see the countless hours that patients have invested in making change. Yet when patients leave treatment, they go back to the lives they once had and back to all the people that knew them before. And in many ways, patients return to relationships and lives as if they had never left. But much has changed for them and within them, but not many things have changed in the quality of the relationships they left to enter treatment. And this places a couple relationship in a unique and tenuous place of flux and instability. Now, I've seen many relationships end in divorce post-treatment or languish in distrust and resentment. And it's hard for both partners to understand, accept, and engage in new, healthy, recovery-oriented ways. And many times, partnered relationships return to old, negative, and triggering interactional patterns of the past when substance use was part of the relationship. And so, oftentimes, prior to treatment, the couple relationship may reflect an interdependent process between substance use and relationship conflict, where substance use creates stress in a couple relationship, but also conflict in the relationship can be a trigger for substance use. And so these two aspects of relating and using substances can exist in an endless cycle and trap a relationship in a negative spiral. And as this cycle becomes more and more intense, the need for treatment becomes more obvious. And eventually there's a tipping point where the substance-using partner seeks help or an intervention brings them to treatment. And so hopefully, post-treatment, this negative couple relationship cycle has begun to shift. And there's potential for a new post-treatment relationship cycle to develop. So post-treatment, the couple relationship shifts a little, and there there is a post-treatment cycle of relating that develops. And in my role as outpatient supervisor, I facilitated IOP and aftercare groups. And a consistent conversation that patients that were in partnered relationships, both heterosexual and same-sex relationships, this conversation that they had with one another and in group was in regards to the increased level of tension they felt in their partnered relationship as they reintegrated into life post their first level of treatment. So patients reported that there were multiple things that were stressors, but these were some of the primary ones that they listed. So one is not feeling validated by their partner for the hard work that they were doing in recovery. And again, this is that phenomenon of here's a patient who's gone to treatment. They are there for maybe 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, or even longer, doing the hard work, and they had minimal interaction with their family or outside relationships. And so there's all this change taking place for them, all this hard work they're doing, and yet their loved one, particularly their partner, might not have seen any of this hard work. And so they get out of treatment feeling great, feeling like they are on a good path to recovery, and their partner just isn't with them in that place. And so oftentimes there can be stress or disagreement where the partner who's been in treatment feels like their partner at home is not appreciating the hard work that they're doing. Another stressor could be feeling as if their partner had a "this is your problem" or "your recovery" mentality. And it's not that the partners weren't concerned for the addicted partner that had been in treatment, but they didn't have a level of investment that allowed their partner who had just come back from treatment to feel like they were together in this struggle. And so it was more kind of this idea, if the addicted partner stopped drinking or using, that was great. But their partner did not really care about the process of how they achieved this goal. Another stressor would be not being trusted, feeling like they were being watched, being dealt with as if they were fragile and about to relapse. Many patients felt like they were being monitored, like maybe like an adolescent might be monitored by their overbearing parents. And so this created a lot of stress and tension in the couple relationship. And then a final stressor would be, in some cases, the non-addicted partner continued with their own social use of substances without regard for the circumstances of their recovering partner. And this was a really significant place of tension for many partner relationships, trying to figure out how they would navigate this new dynamic. And then there is a final one. I forgot about this one. Also, partners felt that there was stress created in the relationship because they didn't feel that their non-addicted partner really understood the chronic illness component of addiction. And so they continued to feel shamed for their struggle, feeling as if they were weak or if they just didn't have enough self-control. And so what these stressors contributed to was a new kind of post-treatment relationship cycle that might look like this. Now, this is a diagram borrowed from Falls and Stewart. And if you notice, here you have this new dynamic of arguments about past use, of nagging behavior, of caretaking behavior, of those other stressors that were just mentioned might be located in this top triangle. And this contributed to relationship dysfunction. And then this bottom triangle here is that the couple relationship doesn't have enough skills. They don't have enough communication skills. They don't have enough different behaviors, recovery-oriented behaviors developed yet to manage this conflict and tension. And then that was a potential for substance use or relapse again. And so this is, I think, a place that many patients who have partners who are not addicted, who have not gone to treatment, run into post-treatment. And so then the question is, so what can be done? to help these couples move together in a positive direction. And my simple thesis is that what the couple needs is the couple needs help creating our recovery story, not your recovery story. And so substance use in the recovery process can either break a couple apart or bring them together in a deeper relationship. And toxic couple relationships can change, and healing can be possible. And the old patterns do not have to persist. And this sense of belief and hope has to be held by the clinician working with a couple post-treatment. And I think that this hope held by the clinician will help couples then begin to understand this concept of developing our recovery story, not just your recovery story. And in essence, what I mean by our recovery story is I'm talking about the process of building bonds of attachment between the partners. Attachment theory states that when we as humans feel safe physically and emotionally, we have the capacity to connect with others in a deep and intimate manner. However, if we do not feel safe physically or emotionally, the capacity to connect with others is blocked because our bodies and our brains are overwhelmed with the task of trying to maintain our physical and emotional safety. And so, our recovery story is the process of developing a more safe couple relationship. And a couple relationship that has been touched by addiction is not a safe place. It's not a safe place for the non-addicted partner because there's the constant threat that their partner may be using. And the threat of use brings with it countless dangers. One of these might be the potential for intimate partner violence. That might have characterized the relationship in the past. There's the fear of the addicted partner dying, particularly as we learn more and more about the opiate epidemic and just the high rate of overdose that comes with opiate use and heroin use. These are real concerns that people do die from using substances. And so a non-addicted partner has that fear that they carry around with them. Also, there's this trying to cope with the constant feeling of betrayal that also creates an unsafe couple environment. And then the feeling of constant chaos and uncertainty creates a sense of not being safe, not knowing what's going to happen. And so these contribute to an environment that is not safe for a couple relationship. And that's not only true for the non-addicted partner, there's also that reality for the addicted partner. There's a high correlation between substance use and trauma. And so just in and of itself, that addicted partner may be dealing with just a constant internal sense of insecurity and lack of safety, which then is translated into that partnered relationship. Also, the conflictual nature of the couple relationship post-treatment can feel unsafe. And being out of control and living a chaotic lifestyle of substance abuse creates a sense of insecurity and lack of safety that the addicted partner, even post-treatment, is still trying to deal with and still trying to navigate. That hasn't, that sense of chaos and being sort of on shaky ground has not left just because they went to treatment. And so also the addicted partner may not feel that their partner is a safe person to be close to because of that the conflict that's there, or maybe they don't feel understood, or maybe there's resentment and bitterness from the past. And so all of these things come together to create an environment that can feel unsafe and cause couples to have more of a me versus you mentality rather than our recovery process. And so there's another way of saying this, our recovery process, or developing an our recovery story, is that couples need to create a we story. And a we story is a type of couple narrative composed by both partners that describes a vivid shared memory. And these stories often provide an important image, metaphor, or phrase that serves as a touchstone for the relationship. They embody the love and commitment each partner feels for the other. So the couple, if they're to be a healthy, safe, secure couple, has to begin to write a story or multiple stories about their life together in recovery. And this will create a sense of we-ness, of togetherness, that's different than their previous cyclical story of conflict and addiction. And so there's several components of a we story and that identify what it is. And so one of these components is a we story helps shape the couple's identity, helps them know who they are now in recovery. It also becomes a source of meaning-making and purpose. So as they begin to reshape who they are as a couple, they begin to reshape what they find to be valuable, what they find to be meaningful, what is their purpose together as a couple. It also acts as a guide for the present and future relationship. So as a couple begins to develop a we story or multiple we stories about who they are, it helps them make decisions in life. Is this job consistent with who we are now in recovery? Is this friendship consistent with who we are now in recovery? So it gives kind of help for present decisions and future actions as well. And then a final component of a we story is that it holds the couple's wisdom and it transmits their legacy. When you think of the 12-step model and you think of step 12 and part of what it is doing, in a sense, it is bringing a legacy of recovery to other addicts and alcoholics who are seeking recovery. And so that individual who is moved through the process, worked the steps, then goes to that 12th step, and that acts of service to, in a sense, transmit their wisdom and their legacy to others. And for a couple, it is the same thing. That's the idea of a we story where they are developing a joint story of recovery of who they are that then they can share and pass on to those around them. And so this idea of a we story, if couples are able to engage in it, if couples are able to develop these kinds of stories, what they will find is that they will have a sense of security. They will feel safe with one another. Also, they will begin to have empathy for one another. They will begin to be able to understand where the other person is coming from, how they are feeling about this whole process of recovery. And in being able to do that, they will feel accepted and validated by their partner, which then again builds that security. There'll also be a sense of mutual respect for each other. There'll be a sense of acceptance of one another for the good, the bad, the ugly. There will be also a sense of just enjoying one another. As you begin to rediscover who we are as a couple in these we stories, hopefully it brings a sense of joy as you become more focused and more closely aligned with being who you want to be in recovery as a unit. And then also, it allows for moments of humor. Humor really is useful in helping to diffuse conflict and tension and difficulty. And these we stories can help couples move into places where they will connect with one another through laughing about life and the challenges that it brings. And ultimately, what a we story helps do is it helps a couple create a shared meaning and vision. And if you notice here, you have a home that is built on good principles, a home that is built on solid interactional patterns, solid qualities and characteristics that help this couple feel safe. So then the next question, well, so how do you do this? How do you help a couple create a we story or we stories about recovery? And so one of the things is you have to focus on communication. You have to focus on education. You have to focus on storytelling. And the process of helping couples strengthen their communication, helping couples become more educated about addiction and recovery, and helping couples learn to tell a story. These processes themselves, as couples go through them together, will help them develop a we story about recovery. And so let's look at communication. Now, communication has to shift in how the couple talks to each other and how they feel about one another. And so there's this interrelated component to communication. You can't talk in a healthy manner with your partner if you don't feel positively towards them. And you cannot feel positive about your partner if you talk in mean, negative, and aggressive ways. Thus, to make a change in one area, talking or feeling will mean a change in the other. And so what we're looking at is communication, in a sense, the talking part. And for us today, we're going to rely on some of the research by John Gottman. And John Gottman is a researcher out of the University of Washington, and he established the Gottman Institute, where he researched what are the qualities present within a couple that allow them to have a meaningful and thriving relationship. And in his research, he was able to predict with 90% accuracy if a couple would remain married or get divorced. And one of the areas Gottman assesses is that of communication. And he's developed some categories of what unhealthy and healthy communication are in a couple relationship. And he states that there are 4 types of communication in a couple relationship that, if present, are strong predictors of divorce. And he refers to these 4 types of communication as the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. It's very foreboding, but I think that it communicates the idea that if these ways of communicating with one another are present, they will be very, very destructive to a couple relationship. So what I want to do is I'm going to take a look at these categories and how they might present in the context of a couple relationship, and particularly a couple where one of them has just returned from treatment. And so for the purposes of illustration, I'll be using a hypothetical couple, Michael and Shanna. And Michael has just returned from treatment, and Shanna is his partner. And so you notice here that there's a graph, and it has the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, these types of communication that, if present in a relationship, can be destructive for it. So if you look to the far left of the table there, the first column there says criticism. And criticism is defined as it appears as a complaint or episode of blaming that's coupled with a global attack on a person's personality or character. So frequently, criticism begins with "you always" or "you never." So an example of this might be Shanna comes to Michael and says, "You always lied before you left for treatment. Why would I believe you have changed?" And so this is, again, a place where that criticism, it comes in the capacity of "you always," and then kind of this global attack. You've always done this, so why would it change? And so that is the first negative form of communication. The second is defensiveness. And defensiveness is defined as a counterattack used to defend one's innocence or avoid taking responsibility for the problem. Defensiveness often takes the form of cross-complaining or whining. So an example of this might be, so after, Shanna comes and levels this criticism against Michael, Michael might snap back at Shanna and say, "I wouldn't even have to drink if you weren't such a nag. I only lied because I can't stand your constant nagging. You never listen, so why should I tell the truth?" And again, there's this cross-complaining, this sense of whining and of shifting away of responsibility when criticism is heard. Another form of negative communication would be contempt. This is criticism bolstered by hostility or disgust. Contempt often involves sarcasm, mocking, name-calling, or belligerence. So an example of this might be Shanna fumes at Michael and says with cold focus, "Oh, I'm sorry I nag. Maybe if you weren't such a weak-willed drunk, I wouldn't have to be such a nag. But since you have no self-control, my only option is to nag so that you don't end up doing something really stupid like driving our kids around drunk." Now, in this, you can hear that it's criticism, but there's this edge of contempt and hatred in it. Shanna really goes for kind of the low blow where she says, "You're a weak-willed drunk," and then brings the kids into it and says, "You're going to do something dangerous and hurt them." And so, again, there's this particular flavor to contempt that is really, really destructive, really mocking, full of sarcasm and belligerence. And then the final way of negative communication that can be harmful to couples is stonewalling. And this happens when listeners withdraw from the conversation, offering no physical or verbal cues that they're affected by what they hear. And interacting with somebody who does this is like talking to a stone wall. So let's say that after Shanna has said all of these things in this last contemptuous comment, she feels bad, and she comes to Michael and she approaches him later and says, "I'm sorry." And as she talks, Michael simply nods and says, "Okay," and walks out of the room. And there, Michael's communicating, "I'm done. I'm not talking to you anymore. There's no opportunity for us to be close." And so these types of communication are blocking Michael and Shanna from being able to attach and operate as a we. In each description, the couple is moving further apart rather than closer together. And if this continues, they'll simply become more and more resentful of one another. So then the question is, well, what can be done? How can this communication be changed so that this couple can move towards developing we stories? Well, Gottman offers two suggestions. Well, he offers many suggestions, but he offers two that I specifically want to look at. And these are alternatives to the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And so the first is what might be referred to as a softened startup. And a softened startup is the ability to start talking about a complaint or problem gently without criticizing or insulting. An example of this might be, "I know we're having an argument right now, but I really do want to understand what's going on for you. Would it help if I tell you what is happening for me right now?" So imagine if Michael had said that to Shanna when she came to him to apologize. Imagine if he said, "I know we're having an argument right now, but I really do want to understand what's going on for you. Would it help if I tell you what is happening for me right now?" And then he could have gone in and talked about how painful or hurtful it was for him to have her say those contemptuous remarks. So a softened startup is an alternative. The other alternative is this concept of turning towards. And so Gottman talks about how each interaction in a couple relationship is a bid for attention. He says relationships consist of a series of emotional bids. These are verbal and nonverbal means of reaching out for emotional connection with a comment, question, smile, or physical touch. And there's three options for how a partner could respond to a bid for attention. They could turn away and ignore the bid. They could turn against by reacting with anger and hostility. So if you think about turning away, that would be the stonewalling. That would be, Shanna's coming to say, "I'm sorry," and Michael turns away from that bid and walks away. You could look at the other three types of communication, the criticism, the defensiveness, and the contempt, as the turning against or reacting with anger or hostility. So those are the other ways that Shanna and Michael responded to one another. But the more healthy alternative is to turn toward by being open, listening, and engaging. And so if couples are able to practice these two aspects of communication, they will have a better chance of coming to a place of connection and developing a we story. And even if the couple finds that they frequently fall back into one of the four unhealthy patterns of communication, that's fine. As long as they're able to repair the damage by utilizing these positive or healthy means of communication, they'll be able to connect and understand one another. Now, I'd like to walk you through an exercise that you can do with couples to build the skills of a softened startup and the idea of turning towards bids of attention. Gottman refers to this exercise as looking for the longing behind the complaint. As we've discussed, each partner in the couple relationship wants to feel safe, connected, and close. And many times we shield our longings for these things behind complaints. And this is often done because we're afraid that our longing won't be met, and so we choose a passive way of expressing the longing. Let me try and explain this a little bit more. So Shanna comes to Michael and says, I can't trust anyone anymore. You've ruined my ability to trust because you are a compulsive liar. Now, as we already talked about, this comment can easily be experienced by Michael as criticism. However, if Michael remembers his alternatives to the four horsemen, he can choose to respond to Shanna differently. If Michael is able to remember that Shanna is making a bid for attention in her comment, now it's not a helpful one, but one nonetheless, he can then think to himself, how can I turn towards Shanna? This is where the softened startup can come into play, and Michael can look for the longing, the desire to feel safe, connected, and close behind Shanna's complaint. Michael might say something like, well, Shanna, I've really hurt you. Not being able to feel like you can trust me must feel so unsafe. I don't know what to do right now. It seems like you don't either. Here, Michael has turned towards Shanna's bid for attention with a softened startup, trying to understand what the longing is behind Shanna's comment. Now, this approach may create just enough space for the couple to not continue down a negative interactional pattern, but choose to move towards a healthier understanding of one another. And then what can happen is if the couple is able to repair, this can begin to be part of their we story, where they are learning together how to be together in recovery, how they're learning to change old ways of being into new ways of being. And this allows them to feel together. And so that would be an aspect of what a we story is and how one's created. So here's a practical exercise that you could do with clients or patients that you are working with around these issues. So I want you to take, what you would do is you would sit down with the couple and you would take some of the frequent complaints you hear from couples regarding their experience of one another in the midst of addiction and recovery. So here are some examples. A complaint might be, now he's so focused on his recovery, he still doesn't pay attention to me. It's like he has a new addiction. Another complaint might be, all she worries about is whether or not I'm using. What about the other parts of my life? Work, family, parenting, etc. Final complaint could be, he has no emotions. I can't even talk to him about what happened. So I wonder, have you ever heard these complaints from patients or clients that you've worked with in regards to their partner as they're trying to navigate recovery, trying to navigate life post-treatment? Perhaps you have. I know I have. So then the exercise is to try and understand, educate the couple about the impact of healthy communication, what it looks like, and how it can be different. Walk the couple through the four horsemen and the alternatives, and then let them express some of the complaints, maybe these are some of them, that they have for one another. Write the complaints down, just like we've done here. I've written them down in this column. And then ask each partner to imagine what the longing is behind the complaint. What is the complaining partner really trying to say? And so, for example, it might look like, well, for this first complaint, maybe what the partner is really saying is, I don't want to feel alone in this pain. I want you to pay attention to me. I feel like I'm still isolated and alone because of your addiction. I don't want to feel alone in this pain. Maybe another longing with the other complaint might be, I want to feel like I'm more than my addiction. That's such a healthy longing. It's a longing that many folks who are recovering want. They want to feel like they're more than their addiction, that there's more to who they are. And perhaps the longing with this other complaint, this last complaint could be, if he would tell me how he feels, it would make me feel important and special to him. Now, if you look at these longings, what you notice is that there's no attack, there's no defensiveness, there's no contempt, there's no criticism, there's no stonewalling in it, because what is happening is the partner who's making the complaint is trying to recognize what is the deeper thing behind the complaint. The partner who is hearing the complaint is trying to locate in an empathic way what might they really be trying to say. This complaint really isn't the main point. The main point is the longing. And so let the couple begin to work through their communication struggles in this manner, and hopefully it will increase their sense of safety, connection, and closeness, which in turn will support them in developing a we story where they're together, not isolated in their opposition to one another. And so communication is an important part of helping couples post-treatment develop these we stories. Another important thing to focus on is education. And again, I think one of the most empowering things I have seen for patients seeking recovery is beginning to understand addiction as a chronic illness. And this perspective offers patients the ability to take responsibility for choices in the past, but also be freed from the shame of feeling like they're weak or that they're failures. And I think family members and partners can also benefit from this understanding of addiction because it allows them to locate compassion it allows them to locate compassion for their loved one. Rather than their loved one being a self-centered person that's actively trying to destroy relationships and hurt the people closest to them, they can begin to see that the ability to choose has long since left their partner. That what their partner is dealing with is an illness that they need help managing, understanding, and navigating. So being educated about addiction as a chronic illness allows a couple to stop pointing fingers and come together to address the illness. The illness can now be the focus of attention, and helping the partner thrive in the midst of an illness can be a goal instead of shaming the partner for the poor choices they've made. Additionally, the addicted partner can begin to conceptualize what it might be like for their partner to have to deal with a chronic illness and find compassion for how complex and challenging this new reality is. And so this process of being educated about addiction as a chronic illness is another avenue for the couple to walk down together and another way for them to develop a we story related to recovery. And there's several ways this education process can begin. I would say that one of the most effective places I've seen is Al-Anon. And so I think that, again, Al-Anon allows for families to engage with the recovery process, with the 12-step process, which can be really beneficial to them understanding what addiction really is. And as they go through the process, they begin to see what their partner has gone through. And again, there's a place of connection and togetherness rather than me versus you, but hey, we're both entering in to recovery because recovery and addiction is a systemic process. And so I think Al-Anon really helps with that. So getting people connected with Al-Anon. A lot of inpatient treatment facilities and even outpatient facilities have a family week. And this can be something as simple as there's a point person that the family can contact and build a relationship with where they can be educated on the process of treatment, educated about addiction. To also, a lot of treatment programs have extended week-long programs where the family members can come and engage with learning about addiction and recovery. And so I think that these are two wonderful things, but oftentimes there's sort of this idea of that's too much trouble, I don't have time, I'm not going to do that, I don't need that. And I think that this is where it could be really beneficial to recommend to family members just to go to the SAMHSA website. There's a wealth of information and understanding and education there on what addiction is. And simply say, okay, you don't have to go to Al-Anon. You don't have to go to Family Week. Just open your computer. Just grab your phone. Go to this website and begin to read about addiction. Begin to read about different substances. Begin to read about recovery and what recovery-oriented care is, and educate yourself. I think that process can be really beneficial for couples as well. And then a final process, of course, would be therapy. The couple going to therapy together with someone who understands addiction, who understands recovery, and understands these dynamics and is able to help a couple develop a we story together. And so I think education is a real important part of this whole we story process that needs to be addressed. And then the final component of this we story process will be the actual storytelling itself. And I've mentioned that a partner relationship will be able to heal post-treatment if the couple focuses on developing a we story or multiple we stories about recovery. And so the goal here in this storytelling process is for each partner to take some time each week to write and then share with their partner what they've written. And as the story begins to develop, the hope is that each individual partner is then able to imagine what their partner experienced or might be experiencing in the same moment. And this process then can be shared between partners, and a we story can begin to develop. A story where empathy, acceptance, respect, pleasure, humor, all those good components of a we story begin to grow. So here's the idea. The idea to the storytelling exercise is to have the couple commit to 6 weeks to engage in this exercise. And the couple will set aside at least 1 hour each week to share with one another the stories they have written. Now, telling your story entails reading what you've written and then your partner asking questions to more deeply understand what you're trying to communicate. And there are 3 stories you'll write, and you should give at least 2 weeks to each story. And it is very important to remember the skills of a softened startup, turning towards bids for attention, and hearing the longing behind the complaint when you do this exercise. And so the stories that each partner will write is story 1. They will write about what led to them entering treatment. And so some questions that, these are some questions here that can help facilitate this process. So if it's the addicted partner writing, they're writing about what led them to going to treatment. So one of the questions is, what do you remember about the 6 months leading up to going to treatment? And for the non-addicted partner, what do you remember about the 6 months leading up to before your partner was admitted? What was it like to say you would go to treatment? What was it like for you to hear your partner say they would go? Why now? What about this time was different and compelled you to go to treatment? Did you talk to the treatment center before going? What was their experience like the first time? What was your experience like the first time you called? Another question, if you had to name a feeling that characterized this time in your life, what would it be? Can you explain this feeling more? Are there any images or word pictures that come to your mind that help you express this feeling? So again, these are just some questions to help guide each partner into writing about this experience of going to treatment. And I want to say there's no right or wrong way to do this. There's no good story or bad story. Another story for you to tell is, what was treatment like? And here's some questions that will facilitate that. And then the final story is, what are your hopes and fears about being out of treatment? And some guiding questions there. And so this exercise is to help bring the couple into the storytelling process. Again, what we're talking about here is this idea of how do we help couples develop a we story, an our story about recovery, so that they are together rather than against one another, and they can break that negative couple cycle that is so prevalent post-treatment. And so we know that a couple relationship post-treatment faces multiple stressors. And helping couples develop a joint recovery story or a we story can help the couples cope during this difficult transition. And communication, education, and storytelling will help a couple develop a we story. Hopefully this gives you some practical things that you can do, and working with couples also gives you some practical ways of thinking about couple relationships post-treatment. And I appreciate your time today. And now we'll hear a few words from our sponsor.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mitchell. Now join us in San Diego, April 16th through the 19th for Innovations in Recovery, Foundation's event's premier conference designed to help you create long-term, sustainable health for your business and patients. With up to 20 hours of available CE and CME credits, panels and presentations from the industry's leading experts and thought leaders, as well as opportunities to network with referral sources, IIR is a powerful investment toward the health of your organization, career, and patients. Clinicians can receive a special rate of $179 for a full 4-day registration. Go to foundationsevents.com/IIR for more info and to register. Thank you so much, and back to you, Dr. Mitchell, for our Q&A session.
I want to welcome y'all to the question and answer portion of the webinar today. And we have about 15 minutes for this. And so what I'd like to do is just address the questions in order as they come to me. So our first question for today is, what if the patient is showing relapse behavior? And I imagine this is in the context of what is the non-addicted partner supposed to do in that situation. And I think the first thing I would say is to understand that relapse behavior is part of the chronic illness of addiction. So that's going to happen. I think that both the addicted partner and non-addicted partner should be aware that these kind of behaviors that have been a part of their lifestyle and use in the past aren't just going to go away by going to treatment. Actually, what treatment is there for is to help patients begin to understand what those behaviors are and what are the triggers that would cause them to begin to move towards relapse. And so actually what I would recommend for couples to do is to go through what the partner has learned together in terms of these are indications of, these are triggers for me, these are what some of my relapse behaviors might be, and I want you as my partner to be a part of that and to be a part of, if you notice something, point it out to me and we can talk about it and have a conversation about it. It by no means that the non-addicted partner is to be a police for their partner who's come home. But I think that relapse behavior shouldn't be such a point of conflict and contention. It should actually be an understanding that this is part of the chronic illness of addiction, and so that they're going to be present, and we want to be aware of it, and we want to be able to talk about it as a couple. So I think that part of what therapy could also look like is walking a couple through how do we have these conversations? What are these things that might be relapse behaviors? Another question is, how can couples separate the enmeshment that comes with being in relationships? Well, that's a really big question. It's also, I think, similar to another question that that I saw down here that says, how does couple agency fit into the we story? And so if you look at what Singer and Scarrett say about a we story, they say that it takes two strong individuals to have a we story. And so the idea of a we story is simply to give the couple a goal or a vision, a joint goal, a joint vision that they can develop together, something that they can work towards together, kind of like a third entity in their relationship. And so I think that what that means is each partner brings to that story aspects of themselves, strengths, skills, and they add that to the story, and then each partner is to respect and to honor those things with one another. And so I think that the process of actually developing a joint vision, a joint purpose, a joint story is part of that process of breaking the enmeshment. People have to have their own ideas. They have to have their own opinions. They have to have their own thoughts. They have to have boundaries about this is what's acceptable in our relationship. This is not what's acceptable in our relationship. And all of that is part of developing this joint purpose. So I think naturally this process of developing this joint recovery story actually does break that enmeshment process and does cause each person in the couple to have some agency and to act for themselves. Another question we have is, how can couples learn to let go of the past with forgiveness and second chances? And I think that this is a real important part of where the psychoeducation and the understanding of addiction as a chronic illness is important. Because I think that in understanding that addiction is something where choice gets replaced with the physiological need and the physiological demands of addiction on a person's body, there can be compassion and there can be forgiveness for moments when there might be a relapse or where there might be old behaviors or old ways of doing things. And so I think that, again, just an understanding of addiction in those terms is beneficial, but also I think that, forgiveness and second chances are much more easy to give also if the addicted partner is someone who is doing the work. Oftentimes in 12-step, they refer to, are they working the program? Are they doing the hard work of recovery? I think if someone's demonstrating that they're doing the hard work of recovery, being accountable, seeking a recovery community, going to treatment, working on relationships, that when there are those difficulties or maybe there's those steps backwards, I think that it is also hopefully easier for the partner to recognize what is going on and find a place for forgiveness and second chances. So, and that's not easy. This is one of the great struggles for couples, and each couple has their limits. Each couple has their kind of like this is enough, and so there's some subjectivity to this as well. Another question we have here is just where can that Gottman book be found? And that's the 10 Lessons for Transforming Your Marriage. A good old search on Amazon will help you find that book. So if you just go to Amazon and even just type in John Gottman's name, many of his books will come up for you. Question here, what if one spouse uses all 4 horsemen of the apocalypse routinely? Is communication change for that person realistically possible? Well, and I would say actually we all use these 4 horsemen in our communication. I think that there's definitely ones that we might tend towards or trend towards. So, for example, I think one that I might tend towards or trend towards is stonewalling. That just kind of fits my personality, fits how I sometimes deal with conflict. But that doesn't mean that I'm also not defensive or that I don't criticize or that I don't speak with contempt. And so I think that, we don't just need to think of these as we all do one or the other. We do many of them. And what we're really trying to work towards is how do we not do any of them, or how do we do them as little as possible? And so I would say, yes, I definitely think that communication change would be possible for this individual. It simply is this individual coming to understand what these 4 horsemen are, being open to having a dialogue with a therapist or their partner or coach or something like that in terms about addressing them. So, question here, let's see. It says, how would you address a non-addicted partner who refuses to accept the we mentality about recovery, one who doesn't want it to be their problem as well? This is, I think, one of the greatest struggles with thinking about addiction in a systemic manner. We live in a world and live in a culture where we just want to say that, that is their problem. I'm not a part of that problem. We're very individualistic in how we assign success and also failure. And I think that, it's not an easy thing. There's not really a formula for how you can get someone to shift to understanding that they might be a part of this systemic process of addiction or substance dependence. And so I think that that's where it goes back to trying to at least offer those basic levels of education about what is addiction, what is a systemic understanding of addiction, how do relationships influence someone's emotions and thoughts and behaviors. I think that there's a great and it's kind of escaping me right now, but there's some great little data on what roles do people and families play when there's an addicted person. And if you actually just a simple Google search will allow you to find what are the family roles within an addicted family, and there's things like the mascot and some other monikers for who these people are. And I think that that's a helpful thing to look at with clients, because it at least begins to get them to think about, could they be any part of this? So maybe looking at family roles and finding that there's even a family role assessment of how you can assess what is your role within the addicted system, and maybe having a family member do that, and maybe that would be helpful. Let's see here, another question. What do you think about each partner working on themselves and their own healing before they are in couple counseling? And I think that this is definitely a popular perspective. I think some of it is just theoretically where you come from. But again, I just really take the view that addiction is not an individual problem. Problems exist within a context. They exist within relationships. And so one of the things as a couples therapist that I often talk to when someone comes to me and says, I just want to work individually on a problem, whether it's addiction or not, is I simply say, we can do that, and you can experience great change in this process of working individually. The problem is you're going to change, and then you're going to go back to your relationship, and your relationship might not change with you. And then that can create some real struggle and some real problem. And so I really believe that if individual members of a couple relationship want to change, the best way to do that is to change together so that the relationship stays strong and so that the relationship also changes along with the individuals. And I want to look at, maybe we'll skip down here. It looks like we have maybe a few more minutes for another question. What might be a good way to handle the negativity of the in-laws in the communication process? Wow, this is a great question, and this is one that many families face. And again, I would recommend that when you think about addiction treatment and you meet with providers, or you go to treatment centers, or you go to therapists, that you try to involve as many people as possible in those conversations. So that would be the in-laws as well. That would mean when you are looking up, trying to learn, about addiction and what it means, and talking to other professionals, that you always include the in-laws in that process, and you include parents and siblings and uncles and aunts. And the reason being because there are a lot of preconceived ideas about what addiction is. A lot of these people have been hurt and harmed by the addicted partner, and again, change is really tough to have take place if you have a system that feels like it's working against that change. And so it's not an easy task. But again, that's simply what I would do, and as a therapist, that's what I would encourage partners to do. I'd say, hey, bring your family in here, bring your in-laws in here, And let's try to communicate as clearly as possible. And that is another way to begin to set boundaries. That is another way to begin to kind of break the process of enmeshment. And I think also Al-Anon in these situations is really great. So thanks a lot. I'm sorry we had a lot of great questions here, but we are at our time. And so you're now going to be redirected to where you can get your CEUs for the webinar. But thanks for joining us, and thanks for the good questions.